Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we're going to explore what the flesh-eating virus is all about. In the vast and disturbing universe of horror cinema, few concepts are as unsettling and visceral as the one that turns the human body into its own worst enemy. Among the many variations of horror, one of the most chilling is, without a doubt, the flesh-eating virus. This biological nightmare is the central theme of the cabin fever saga, created by filmmaker Eli Roth, who not only wrote and directed the original 2002 film, but also left a significant mark on the development of its sequels as a producer. This story isn't about supernatural monsters or masked killers, but rather about an invisible and merciless enemy that transforms the body into a battlefield, where flesh slowly rots away while the victim remains fully conscious of their inevitable fate. This fictional virus is designed with surgical cruelty. It spreads silently, attacking in a sudden and irreversible manner. The infection process is as swift as it is devastating. Once it enters the body, its effects begin almost immediately. Skin rashes, intense fevers, vomiting, internal bleeding, progressive necrosis, and within hours, the flesh starts peeling off the bones. It's a disease that leaves no room for hope, where death doesn't come as a relief, but rather as the culmination of unbearable suffering. This virus represents one of the purest forms of body horror, where the body itself becomes alien, hostile, and repulsive. That's why in this video, we're going to dive deep into the origin and evolution of this virus within the cabin fever universe. We'll thoroughly analyze the events that trigger its spread in the first film, break down the clinical sequence of symptoms during the first 12 to 24 hours, and see how each character either confronts or succumbs to an infection that punishes even the smallest mistake. We'll also cover the sequels, which, while not as narratively intense as the original, expand the virus's lore and offer new angles for interpretation within this sickening universe. It all begins with a simple but effective premise. A group of 5 college students, Jeff, Marcy, Paul, Karen, and Bert, set off on a trip to a remote cabin, hoping to disconnect from the world, celebrate life, and enjoy nature. However, this idyllic setting quickly turns into a death trap. What should have been a peaceful getaway becomes a bloody nightmare, isolated by the forest, fear, and disease. The story kicks off with a solitary character, a hermit living in the woods nearby. While wandering, he finds his dog dead and grotesquely decomposed. When he touches it, his skin comes into contact with a thick, viscous substance, clearly contaminated. Unknowingly, he becomes patient zero. His body begins to deteriorate, and in desperation, he wanders through the area looking for help. Meanwhile, the 5 students stop at a rural convenience store before arriving at the cabin. There, a disturbing scene unfolds. A boy who seems to have some kind of disability suddenly bites Paul without any apparent reason. Nobody knows what it means yet, but it's a clear sign that things are about to go terribly wrong. Once they settle into the cabin, everything seems normal at first. Jeff and Marcy take the opportunity to be alone, while Paul and Karen grow closer during a visit to a nearby lake. Meanwhile, Bert heads into the woods with a rifle. During his outing, he encounters the hermit, now visibly ill, covered in sores, and in terrible condition. In a panic, Bert accidentally shoots him, and then flees the scene without telling the rest of the group. Later that night, tension rises as the group gathers around a campfire. Bert keeps the incident to himself. At that moment, a strange young man named Grim shows up, accompanied by his dog and a stash of hallucinogenic drugs. At first, he blends in with the group, but his presence is short-lived. Once it starts raining, he vanishes without a trace. Things spiral, completely out of control when the hermit returns. Wounded, bleeding, and delirious, he tries to steal their car to seek medical attention. His appearance terrifies the group. They attack him and accidentally set the car on fire in the chaos. The man escapes, badly injured, and hides in a pond that, as we'll soon learn, is the cabin's water supply. This seemingly minor event sets off a deadly chain reaction. The next day, Paul and Karen drink from the contaminated water. Shortly after, Karen begins showing visible signs of infection. Her skin breaks out in sores, her body trembles, and her overall condition rapidly worsens. Terrified by the risk of contagion, the group decides to isolate her in a makeshift shed, marking the beginning of mistrust, paranoia, and psychological isolation. Meanwhile, Jeff, fearing for his life, decides to leave with supplies, abandoning the others. Bert, who also begins to show symptoms, heads to town in search of help. However, his sickly appearance gives him away. Locals identify him as a threat. The same boy who bit Paul attacks again, and his father, along with other townsmen, decides to hunt Bert down and eliminate any possible source of infection. Back at the cabin, Marcy has a mental breakdown. Paul tries to comfort her, which leads to a moment of intimacy between them. But shortly after, Paul is horrified to discover that Marcy is also infected. Horrible lesions form on her back. When Marcy sees herself in the mirror and notices her skin peeling off while she showers, she panics. She runs outside, only to be attacked and killed by Grimm's now contaminated dog. Paul finds her mutilated body and Karen still alive in agony, being devoured by the dog. With no other choice, he puts her out of her misery with a shovel. This moment, as brutal as it is emotional, marks one of the darkest and most intense points of the entire story. Bert, trying to return, is intercepted and executed by the townsmen. Paul, on the other hand, manages to defend himself and escape. In his desperation, he hits a deer with his car, abandons the vehicle, and continues on foot, wounded and disoriented. Eventually, he stumbles upon a local event, a seemingly normal celebration. There, he runs into Officer Winston, who had visited the cabin earlier. The conversation appears casual at first, but everything changes when Winston receives a radio call ordering him to shoot any infected young person on sight. Paul reacts quickly and strikes the officer. Against all odds, Paul manages to escape with his life, or at least, that's how it appears at first glance. His body, battered by hours of physical and psychological torment, can barely stay upright. He stumbles down the road, drifting between consciousness and delirium, until, like a final glimmer of hope, a truck driver stops upon seeing him. He takes Paul to the nearest hospital, hoping the doctors can help. But this apparent rescue is not the end of the horror. It is the beginning of a much darker chapter. Upon arrival at the hospital, the situation quickly becomes tense and unsettling. The sheriff and a team of doctors await Paul urgently. They want answers, explanations, anything to understand what happened in that cabin deep in the woods. But there are no words to truly describe the nightmare, and Paul can no longer speak. Faced with such a bizarre and incomprehensible case, the doctors decide Paul must be transferred to a larger facility, one with the proper equipment to study whatever is destroying him from within. The sheriff, always concerned with maintaining order, or at least the appearance of it, assigns Officer Winston to escort Paul to the regional medical center. Paul, barely conscious, tries to whisper the truth. He attempts to warn them that the virus is in the water, that the entire town could be in danger. But his words are drowned in the blood pouring from his mouth. Winston, calm and collected, promises to take him to a place with fresh water. Then he drives off in the opposite direction of the hospital. Meanwhile, the sun begins to rise over the horizon. Jeff, the only member of the group who hadn't been infected, emerges from the woods. His clothes are filthy, his face covered in dust and fear, but he's still alive. What he finds in the cabin takes his breath away. Mangled bodies, shattered furniture, bloodstains everywhere. He runs for help, desperate. But when he reaches the town, the police take one look at him and don't hesitate. They believe he's infected. Without asking questions, they execute him on the spot. The only remaining witness silenced. The bodies are collected. The cabin's remains burned to ashes. The officers believe they've erased all evidence, that the problem has been contained. But they couldn't be more wrong. Winston, true to his task, stops the car on a secluded dirt path and drags Paul's body to a small creek. He leaves him there, lifeless, as if he never existed. His fluids, saturated with the infection, slowly seep into the water. And what no one notices is that this humble creek is part of the water supply for the entire town. Soon after, a group of children gathers water from that very creek. With total innocence, they use it to make lemonade, which they sell to the townsfolk. The sheriff, municipal workers, neighbors, they all drink it, blissfully unaware of the unfolding tragedy. And at the same time, a truck loaded with bottles of purified water, drawn from the same contaminated lake where the hermit died, departs toward an unknown destination, carrying with it an invisible and deadly threat. Thus ends the first installment of Cabin Fever, not with a resolution, but with the promise that the true horror is just beginning. An infection that doesn't roar or scream, but spreads with every sip, every drop, every glass. An invisible enemy that needs no violence, just potable water. And now that the story has been told, it's time to analyze the true protagonist of the horror, the flesh-eating virus, a name that might seem exaggerated if it didn't so accurately describe its effects. This pathogenic agent attacks the human body with an almost supernatural ferocity, decomposing soft tissue at an alarming rate and trapping the victim in inescapable agony. During the first few hours after infection, the individual experiences extreme fatigue, a kind of bodily lethargy that could easily be mistaken for simple exhaustion. However, this false calm quickly gives way to an internal storm. Nausea intensifies, high fevers emerge, and the body begins to fail. Reddish spots on the skin are the first external sign that something is deeply wrong. From 6 to 12 hours post-infection, the skin begins to break down, literally. Blisters appear, open sores, and areas where the epidermis peels off with the slightest touch. One unforgettable scene captures this with brutal clarity. Marcy shaves her legs in the shower, unaware that her skin is already rotting, until she slices off entire chunks with the razor. It's grotesque. It's painful. It's inevitable. As the virus progresses, vital organs begin to shut down. The blood thickens, respiratory difficulties appear, and internal bleeding becomes the norm. The infected individual enters a state of full systemic collapse. In less than 24 hours, the victim is on the brink of death. And when it finally arrives, it's not gentle or liberating. It's the end of a nightmare lived in raw flesh. This virus doesn't just infect humans. It can spread to animals just as easily. A dog that drinks contaminated water can become just as dangerous a carrier as a human. Transmission occurs through contact with blood, bodily fluids, or even through methods the film leaves open to interpretation, like airborne transmission or sexual contact. And the worst part is that just a single drop of infected water is enough to unleash an epidemic. Its origin, still a mystery. There are hints suggesting links to infected livestock, particularly pigs. It's suspected that the hermit's dog was the first animal vector to carry the virus into the water. And from there, the cycle began. In the second movie, Paul survives, though his body is completely disfigured. He's barely recognizable. Still, he manages to drag himself to a road, where he is ultimately run over by a school bus. The scene is brutal. The driver panics, but Winston quickly arrives and covers up the incident. He tells the driver that he hit a deer, and the bus keeps going. That vehicle, now soaked with contaminated fluids, arrives at a high school. There, the virus finds a new home. Students, teachers, staff all fall victim. The CDC steps in, but it's already too late. The outbreak is official. The infection can no longer be denied. In the third movie, the action moves to a tropical island paradise. There, scientists are trying to contain Patient Zero, a man who has apparently carried the virus for years. But as the saga has already taught us, horror always finds a way out. The man, driven by the loss of his family, releases the virus inside the lab, and the rest is history. And at its core, all of this was born from a real experience. Eli Roth contracted a facial infection while working in Iceland at the age of 19. While shaving, his skin began to peel off. That personal trauma became the creative spark that gave birth to Cabin Fever.